Content warning. We're going to be discussing the sexual assault of men and women, and immense violence against and exploitation of women. There's not really much poop or gore today, so go nuts. At last, our odyssey of discovery comes to an end as we round out our 3-film examination of the Human Centipede series with the Human Centipede 3. Deviating hard from the themes and format of the Human Centipede 2, which attempted avant-garde in much the same way as one might attempt to put on a tasteful evening show by cramming a firecracker up your bum and lighting it at the table, the Human Centipede 3 out-dialogues the first 2 movies by a country mile, wears its themes on its sleeve, and ends up minimally focused on any actual Human Centipede action. It's more about the humans than the centipede. Director Tom Six crafted a 1-hour, 43-minute bonanza that I initially felt was a tongue-in-cheek, almost slapstick comedy about a prison that would never pass inspection, but soon realised was probably one of the worst executions of an idea put to film. In Human Centipede 2 terms, it's now 3 firecrackers, and I'm wearing a cowboy hat and screaming racial slurs. Still, there's a lot we can talk about here, so let's get right into it. If you cast your mind back to my video on the Human Centipede 2, you might remember the content warning I introduced the video with. Basically all of them, I said, shrugging my shoulders. I had tried to note down every possible thing to be aware of, and eventually just gave up. I've never had to do that before, and that's all the Human Centipede 2 was, a carousel of upsetting topics and visuals with very little actual narrative substance. Anything good about that movie had to be interpreted. A lot of you ballers in the comments referred to it as Schindler's List, which I can't take credit for but did admire. The Human Centipede 3 does away with that. This is no phantom tale, no black and white borderline silent movie. This movie saw a proper attempt to write a compelling narrative with actual fleshed out characters with personal motivations, flaws and weaknesses. I really appreciate that. This movie was not boring, fulfilling one of the lowest possible bars of storytelling I hold. Considering the monstrous piece of shit it turned out to be, I need to count these blessings. See, I could have really liked this film if not for one thing, and we'll get to that in just a moment. The Human Centipede final sequence focuses on the life and lamentations of prison warden William Boss, aka Bill Boss, and his assistant Dwight Butler, played by the returning Dieter Lasser and Laurence R. Harvey respectively. Yes, those names are very on the nose, but they're employed in such a rare demonstration of writing subtlety that they are genuinely funny. They're one of those jokes that takes a while to click. When it does click, you go through an initial eye-roll reaction, then you admit it's kind of funny, and then you laugh. It's one of those 3-stage jokes, a slow burner that pays off. Boss and Butler have a problem. Their prison is too violent, its turnover rate is too high, its recidivism rate is too high. Dumb and Dumber here are on the verge of losing their jobs. The governor hates them. He is excited to fire them, and he's going to take any opportunity to fire them. Not only do they need to turn things around, but they need to do it fast and well. So well that the governor has no choice but to keep them on. They've got 2 weeks to exceed expectations and defy impossible odds. And this is where Dwight comes in. Thankfully, Dwight has been watching the Human Centipede series on DVD. In this universe, there are only 2 Human Centipede movies, and if this universe gets a 3rd Human Centipede movie, I hope it will be better than the one I watched because it was a pot of warm wank. Although it takes him a while to be heard over Boss's constant ranting and raving, Butler eventually pitches to him the idea of a human prison centipede, the ultimate crime deterrent, a budget-saving measure from heaven, and an opportunity to, let's be real, play out their sadistic, vile wishes on the prison inhabitants. But how does it go? Well, let's explore that. Well, not until we've explored today's sponsor, Brilliant. We're back with Brilliant, the fantastic daily learning app boasting a catalogue bursting at the seams with lessons in maths, computer science, data and machine learning. I know it's all too easy to wake up in the morning and just lie there on your phone for an hour. I hate it, it feels like I'm rotting. Instead, try Brilliant today and make something of those moments where you're not yet ready to get moving by getting your brain active instead. On the bus, with your coffee, on a flight, passenger princess, there are so many moments in your day that you could be cramming full of opportunities to learn and grow, building real problem-solving skills and critical thinking with a bunch of hands-on lessons. If you're looking for something a little more fun, try the Logic course and play around with code breaking, truth tellers, liars, logical robots, and more. Keep it general or become an expert. Either way, you will be growing and developing useful skills every single day. It's beginner-friendly, but with plenty of challenges for the seasoned STEM appreciator. Give Brilliant a go today and challenge yourself. Try Brilliant today for free over at brilliant.org/merkkk. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Thanks to Brilliant for sponsoring today's video. Before we get into the story, let's discuss the cast. The Human Centipede 3 sees the return of Dieter Larsa, who passed away in 2020. Rest in peace, sir. For those who appreciate tea, The Human Centipede 3 saw some mad movie-making drama when 7 weeks before filming was due to begin, Dieter suddenly refused to have any further part in the project. Producer Ilona Six, Tom Six's wife, said, "Because of the success of The Human Centipede, it seems that Mr. Dieter Larsa's ego has grown to laughably big proportions. First signing the contract and rating The Human Centipede 3 script as fantastic, and then demanding his own unacceptable script changes, and now refusing to play the part only 7 weeks prior to shooting. Six Entertainment Company will start legal action against Dieter Larsa." Larsa said that he couldn't identify with the character the way it was written and developed, and made several suggestions to overhaul the story. That was too much for Tom, and since he couldn't live with my suggestions, and I, as a method actor, couldn't identify with his version, I told him I couldn't see any other way than that he would have to change horses, Larsa explained. That's it. To wear my judgment cap for just a moment, the pettiness was absolutely leaking from both sides. It was boiling over. Both sides of this argument should have kept this to private channels, or had the forethought to run their statements through any competent public relations manager before releasing them, especially Ilona, who spoke as a representative of her and her husband's company. I might be a layman to cinema, but I don't think it's wise to slag off your stars and tabloid newspapers when you're in the process of suing them into being forced to work with you again. Larsa also came off unreasonably self-aggrandizing in his own statements, suggesting that the director couldn't live with his suggestions for improving Bill Boss. And the thing is, I'm going to cut through this right now when I tell you that Dieter Larsa was awful in this movie. I was very complimentary of him in the first film, and I stand by that, but he was absolutely dreadful in The Human Centipede 3. I don't know if that was his fault, but it certainly makes his statements come off rough by comparison. An article in a publication called Empire Online that ran unminimizable adverts and slowed my laptop to a crawl suggested that Dieter eventually came back after being sued hard enough and agreed to do the original script that Tom Six wanted. This smallpox outbreak of a website featured quotes from both parties in betwixt adverts for Adobe Illustrator and Next, stating, in a press release, Six announces that his original screenplay is going ahead as he originally intended. Human Centipede 3 will be very politically incorrect, he promises. But I didn't want to change anything in the script. I'm very happy Dieter will follow my vision for a full 100% now. And no, he is absolutely the most brilliant actor I could wish for. Larsa, meanwhile, gushed, "I never thought all our differences and misunderstandings would in the end lead to an even deeper and warmer understanding and appreciation of each other. In this regard, I am actually thankful about the whole fuss because it turned out to be an advantage and a wonderful present for our film and for our friendship. Bizarre. Thank you, boys." Assuming, or rather blindly hoping, that Dieter wanted a more muted performance, I can only grieve the final result. After the 45-minute mark, Dieter spends all his time on screen screaming his lungs out. None of his lines are delivered at anything below 80 decibels. It becomes excruciating. And don't tell me that's the point, because regardless of how intentional it was that I spent the rest of the movie actively annoyed whenever the warden opened his mouth, I still spent the rest of the movie actively annoyed. Actually, Dieter's performance in this movie is the microcosm of why The Human Centipede 3 didn't work. The thing about extreme cinema is that it is a cinema of extremes, and for extremes there needs to be contrast. The Human Centipede comes out of the gate with extremes that zoom beyond the grim depictions of reality into farcical, impossible contrivances. The movie never settles, and it's the same with the warden. He's always screaming, so the extremity is less apparent. You just get used to it, and then you find it irritating. A more muted performance with occasional high intensity would have been way better. At first, when you think this movie is going to be some black comedy, silly runaround, you kind of blink at it, but you accept it. As time goes on, you realise The Human Centipede 3 is going to take itself slightly too seriously to be something you feel like you're laughing alongside. You never feel like you're sitting with this movie having a good time. It acts like it's too important to be vulnerable with you. It feels like it's saying, come on, I can take a joke, let's joke. But it isn't quite ready to mean it yet. Eventually, I just hated it.
You imbecile, communist, zombie cunt!
Every time that man opened his mouth to deliver a line, I would wilt with horror. Not just because he was going to boil my eardrums with another protracted scream, but because he takes so much time to enunciate every individual word through the screaming that his sentences felt like they spanned minutes. I think this film would have been fantastic with a different actor at the helm and/or different delivery. William Boss is a screaming, caricaturish freak, a portrait of evil done with macaroni pieces, so ludicrously evil that he goes full circle and becomes irritation incarnate. I love a villain, and I think William Boss could have been incredible, but I hated him so much that I ended up hating, and I mean hating, the film by proxy. It's not because he's a rapist, nor that he's a murderer, nor that he's a hypocrite. No in-universe reasons, but his delivery was just so god-awful I wanted to fast-forward every time he opened his mouth. Bill Boss is a caricature of, well, not so much toxic masculinity as he is just a caricature of toxic everything. On paper, he works really well. Boss is a violent, murderous rapist who does what he wants when he wants, and he's also a massive baby. In all of Boss's seesawing character extremities, all his ridiculousness, I would say the best thing about him is that his weaknesses are so clearly in the open. Boss is terrified of sexual assault. His biggest fear is of being raped. And that's pretty relatable, honestly. I think a lot of people would find that reasonable. The thing about William Boss is that his fear of rape has become a complex. His entire life revolves around being in a situation of violent, obsessive control. He's the kind of guy who would lock his bedroom door every night and sleep with the key under the pillow just in case someone crept into his house with ill intent, only to find that the night someone does creep in, they creep through his bedroom window and he's stuck there with him. William Boss is consumed with constant, crippling anxiety around being sexually assaulted. And in that way, I think his background and character have a lot of depth and make a lot of sense. I like the idea that this man is so obsessed with controlling his fate that he ends up running a prison. Like, he's so paranoid about the concept of hypersexual, hyper-aggressive men that he decides to go to the place where he assumes they're all being held, the symbolic snake pit, and run it himself, just to have this facade of absolute control. It's like people who sleep with loaded guns under their pillows because they're scared of dying, only to kill or injure themselves when they accidentally discharge the weapon. In trying to control his fate, Bill Boss puts himself in the most likely possible position for it to happen. For Bill Boss, sex and violence are intertwined. After castrating an inmate he hated, Boss was taken aback when said inmate threatened him with violence in return. Boss immediately strangled him in his bed, had him resuscitated, and then strangled him again. The act is hypersexual. He goes red-faced and strained in the same way we see him go when he receives oral sex, which I'll cover later.
I do not accept this heat.
Bill Boss loathes any humane treatment of prisoners, refusing to attend lethal injections held at his own prison because he considers them city treatment. When waterboarding one of the inmates with boiling water, Bill Boss chants eyes for eyes, teeth for teeth as he does it, consumed with this concept of revenge and dominance, but never with any known origin. We're clearly either far along a timeline of petty jabs between these two, or Boss just does this because he feels the urge to get the last word with anyone who so much as glances in his direction. Even the man he waterboards, previously treating this like a shitty playground back and forth, finds this to be a step too far.
You lost your soul, William Boss.
He's also delusionally insecure about his physical well-being. In a scene that was actually quite funny because it was quite early, Boss is taken in for a physical exam with the on-site doctor, Dr. Jones. We learned in a previous scene that his blood pressure is 160 over 120, and I'm not a mosquito, so I'm no expert, but I'm assuming that's not ideal. During his examination, Dr. Jones remarks that Boss's body and heart are under immense stress, and he can hear a heart murmur. Stress is for pussies, Boss announces, taking the little stethoscope nubbin off Dr. Jones and speaking directly into it. Boss tells him, "Listen, I'm not paying you to give me bad news. I demand good news or your ass will be fired." Meekly, Dr. Jones responds, "You're in perfect health, sir." I love that Boss's delusion steps over the line into denying pure reality, because facts indicate that he's not in perfect health, and imperfect health is for pussy women and babies. He just decides that he is in perfect health, and I suppose his doctor doesn't care enough to fight this battle. It would have been cool to see Boss's health actually make an impact on any of his actions across the movie. It's more just outlined here to show us how deluded he actually is. But it's a funny scene and an interesting addition to his character. There's a lot that works here, especially in such a conceptually grotesque movie. On the other side of this dysfunctional coin, we have Dwight Butler, played by Laurence R. Harvey, who you may remember as Martin Lomax from the Human Centipede 2. Dwight Butler is a southern man, but he's played by a guy from Wigan in England. And while Laurence puts his heart and soul into this performance, you can absolutely tell.
The Human Prison Centipede will be finally complete, on time and under budget.
The thing is, Laurence R. Harvey absolutely laid out to me the kind of bias I hold for actors I think are really trying. Like, Laurence tries so hard in this movie. His deliveries are all really earnest. When his southern accent slipped into South Mancunian, I would just be like, Dwight was probably born in Manchester and raised in the southern states, so his accent probably just slips in and out. Like, I just naturally begin to excuse it, and even find it charming and relatable, as someone who will occasionally say book it in my Hucknall way. Lawrence's earnest delivery further highlighted to me just how much contempt I felt Dieter had for this role, being essentially forced back under legal duress. I can't quite explain it, I just felt like Laurence was trying, and Dieter was phoning it in really hard. Having them side by side magnified the contrast between them, the polar opposite nature of their performances. Laurence delivered lines he had clearly practiced, Dieter felt like he read off the script a few times before a scene began, and then just screamed the lines exactly as they were printed on the page. There's not a lot to say about Dwight because he isn't so much his own character as he is a prop. He's like a broken steering wheel, trying to keep a runaway vehicle on the road. Butler's purpose in this movie is to serve as the voice of reason for Boss's massive ego. Boss runs entirely on instinct and selfish desire. He looks past the people around him as though they don't exist. So when Dwight proudly presents him with the DVDs for the Human Centipede 1 and 2 at the start of the film, there's easily an hour left on the clock before he will actually hear what he has to say. This occurs after the warden's proposed castration program doesn't work. He believed that castrating prisoners would lower their aggression, but after testing this theory on his personal nemesis, inmate 297, Boss finds that it has only made him angrier. After Boss suggests that he kill everyone in the prison and then himself, Dwight reminds him that it's his job and life on the line too. He has a speech prepared, reciting, "A human centipede of prisoners, sharing one digestive system. No more prison faults, assaults on guards, or disrespect. Literally on their knees, begging for mercy. The ultimate deterrent for those considering a career in crime. We don't have to deal with their shit anymore. They just have to deal with each other's." Dwight is the one who guides the warden down this unstoppable path, although he suffers for it. Dwight's characterization and role in this movie can be a bit inconsistent. Although he is initially the meek voice of reason, Dwight suddenly becomes cunning and psychopathically invested when Bill Boss begins the procedure. As Bill Boss walks from cell to cell with a tranquilizer rifle, sedating prisoners like shooting fish in a barrel, Dwight strolls along behind him. He smirks, smoking one of Bill Boss's cigars, eyes flitting left and right as the work is done around him. He looks like a self-assured predator, an evil genius who is now in full control over Bill Boss. The impression we get is that he is about to flip their dynamic on its head, and Bill Boss is going to be dominated by the last person he expects. Only this isn't the case. When the governor congratulates the boys at the end of the movie for their genius idea, the two are left to celebrate their success in the medical bay. Dwight, who would know Bill Boss's insecurities, proudly announces, "This was my idea." Boss, initially seeming quiet and thoughtful, answers, "You're absolutely right. You're indeed a genius. You came up with this idea and you deserve every credit. Give me a hug, Dwighty." Dwight, brought to tears, embraces him. And I love this shot because the natural length of the hug ends. The doctor raises his gun to Dwight's head, and you can see Laurence R. Harvey literally waiting for his cue to end the hug. He stands still with his eyes closed, no longer actively hugging, just waiting for the word from the director. This shot lingers a few seconds too long. So, let's talk about the story. The Human Centipede 3 begins on the tail end of the Human Centipede 2, similar to how the Human Centipede 2 began with the first few minutes of the Human Centipede 1. Thankfully, they use a much shorter segment of the film this time to illustrate their point. Dwight is showing Bill Boss this movie on some ratty old TV in his office. They're in an American southern state prison. The warden is wearing a full white suit complete with cowboy hat and cigar. He lights his cigars with one of those little creme brulee flamethrowers. Side note, but creme brulee kinda sucks, sorry. Anyway, this movie initially feels like it's going to be a dark comedy. For as long as Larsa keeps his performance on the quieter end, this movie is quite good. So if you decide to watch this movie for yourself, be aware that things will change. Some examples. He mockingly compares Dwight Butler to Martin Lomax, saying he would look exactly like that pervert if he shaved his brush, but with more slurs, honestly. There's a moment where he receives a package of dried clitorises to chew for great strength. He explains this to Dwight, who dimly just responds, "What?" And Larsa, annoyed, just yells, "clitorises," chewing on each syllable, just as he chews on every meaty little morsel. And there's a scene where he makes a fuss in his office, and when his secretary Daisy comes to check on what's wrong, he grabs her by the head and pushes her back out of the door.
What's going on?
Shut up!
If the movie kept this ridiculous back and forth going, this vibe of irritated boss and confused accountant, this slapstick door shoving that, while rude, had nothing to do with sexual violence or humiliation, which I'll get to, I think The Human Centipede 3 would have been really good. I began this movie so optimistic about the direction it would go. It was earnest, funny, and besides the already budding themes of miserable sexual violence against poor Secretary Daisy, I was having a really good time with it, only it didn't last. When discussing The Human Centipede 3 with the Guardian newspaper, Tom Six stated, "My film is like one big satire of the prison system, but also, you can't take it seriously." And I'll say this, the observations made by this film on the American penal system are some of its strongest suits, although that's not saying much. The Human Centipede 3 makes a strong foray into satirizing and even parodying the current American correction system, but lost me a little bit towards the end. Still, it's certainly worthwhile unpacking. In my video on the Outlast trials, I had a commenter ask, "You say this game borders on parody, and then you continue to take it seriously for hours. Why are you wasting your time with this?" And to that I say, I took it seriously for 1 hour, actually, but also because satire, and more generally speaking parody, are perfectly valid and one of the most effective forms of political commentary we have. Are you familiar with Monty Python?
Strange women lying in ponds distributing swords is no basis for a system of government.
Or Black Mirror's The National Anthem? So, The Human Centipede 3 shines an explicit spotlight on the current issues with the American prison system. As Boss and Butler walk to Block 4 to stifle some insurrection-related stabbing, Dwight lists off several statistics about their prison, named the George H.W. Bush State Prison.
Our prison relatively has the highest personnel turnover, violence rates, legal and medical costs than any other institution in the US correctional system.
Later, when Bill Boss is told by local Governor Hughes that he and Butler will be fired if they don't turn the prison around within 2 weeks, he sits with his accountant to discuss deterrence, remarking prison should be a real deterrent, not a goddamn nursing home. I like this statement from Bill Boss because we see the interior of this prison, and we've seen the behaviour of its inmates, and tongue-in-cheek jokes aside, this is far from a nursing home. This is a very rapey, stabby, violent prison out in the middle of a desert. There's a lot of torture, and it also has on-site executions as a consequence of their state's death penalty. If nothing deters you from that, then I don't know what will. I like how his attitudes here mirror real-life attitudes that all you have to do is go to prison for a warm bed and 3 meals a day, which often ignore the fact that the prison system in America is rife with sexual and physical abuse. Medical care is often incompatible with human dignity, and incarcerated individuals are often leased out for literal slave labour. Despite owning the prison, the warden still sees it as an easy ride. In terms of setting up a satirical premise behind a character who seems as erratic as they are delusional, The Human Centipede 3 does a surprising quality job. The warden wants to make this hellhole even worse, suggesting medieval torture methods like reverse hanging and Spanish boots. At this point, Dwight follows up with more statistics about the penal system, stating, "The system, as it is now, just doesn't function. This country spends over $50 billion a year on corrections, but more than 4 in 10 return to prison within 3 years." So we have this impression of George H.W. Bush State Prison that it is explicitly laid out to echo wider issues in America, issues of budget overspend and reoffense, and The Human Centipede 3 is about to explore a solution to that. Now, I don't think The Human Centipede 3 is going to advocate for that solution, but rather take the concept of applying extremely inhumane punishment to a nationwide problem, play the solution out to its logical ends, and then conclude the movie on a depressing note. Do I think it does this well? I'm not sure I would say that. I think our main problem is our test group. The prisoners of George H.W. Bush State Prison are monstrous animals. All of them threaten to rape Bill Boss over and over again. Inmate 297, a man who Bill ends up castrating in retaliation, tells Boss that he will rape him to death.
I'm gonna rape you to fucking death. And it scares you. I can see it.
The guy who played that bloke on the prison boat in that one Batman movie stabs a guard and then tells Boss that rape will be your destiny, a bizarre statement that triggers a panic attack in Boss. He breaks the man's arm in retaliation. Inmate 346 prank calls Boss's office to tell him he's coming up to rape him and he's bringing a death squad, and later threatens to scalp him. These actions all result in Boss having panic attacks and retaliating 100 times worse, with broken bones, castrations without anesthesia, and boiling water waterboarding, which Bill Boss announces as
Boiling waterboarding by Bill Boss.
I like that he signs off on it. It's a real personal touch. When an early movie rape threat related meltdown causes Bill Boss to collapse onto his knees in the corridor, firing his gun into the ceiling and screaming, "You're gonna rape me to death, come on motherfuckers," into the camera, we see cuts to the prisoners in the cells screaming and thrashing themselves against the bars like animals, panting at him, looking rabid with strange warrior rape lust.
What was that? The movie has started for like 5 minutes.
I could believe that the inmates are doing this because they know it gets to Boss and it's some way of taking back power by collectively bullying him. It brings out this physical reaction, this panic attack that often has him cowering under desks and behind doors, clutching his various guns for safety. It does really bear his vulnerability, but by that same merit, there's no evidence in the movie that they are doing this as some coordinated effort to take back power from their oppressor. And the way they pant and scream at him in their cells just demonstrates to me that Six has purposefully written a prison full of actual violent rapists who actually genuinely do just threaten to rape people to death. Like, one of them is called Craig Sinner, for God's sake. The warden reflects on him while reading the newspaper article about Sinner's execution by lethal injection. Dwight, who was present for that, remarked, "Well, he called for Satan before he died." For this human prison centipede ending to work, this dour, depressing consequence of one madman's unchecked power over an entire prison of people without recourse for their treatment, it would benefit them to be written with some humanity. No, I'm not saying he needs to be ruling over a building full of gentle sweet peas who never did anything wrong. I'm thinking along the lines of Watchmen character Rorschach, who is behaviourally and personally awful, but morally admirable, or someone on the opposite end of the spectrum like Dutch van der Linde, who is extremely personable and charismatic whilst being morally repugnant. If every prisoner we met in this movie was like 30% relatable, like Trevor Phillips, who is my favourite GTA 5 character, but I would never be in a room alone with him, this movie's message and subsequent conclusion would have been vastly improved. It sucks to see people get put into a human centipede, yeah, but honestly, better them than me. If you're going to make statements about reoffence rates, but then turn all of your example prisoners into actual violent rape demons with no chance of rehabilitation beyond putting the fear of God into them, you're not making a film that satirizes the prison system so much as you're making a movie that satirizes prisoners and blames them for the state of the penal system as it exists. The sequence of events leading to the creation of the 500-man human prison centipede began with the governor's visit, as played by Eric Roberts, who is in like 25 movies per year. He's pretty good in this film, but I don't think he's given a lot to work with. I think his stage directions were basically just, you hate these men, but you also have to deal with them regularly. So he walks around the office with this stapled on smile that doesn't reach his eyes. It's a good stapled on smile, don't get me wrong, but his character doesn't have much depth and there's very little range he's given until he gets to react to the human centipede itself at the end of the movie. Governor Hughes shows up and tells Boss, "Answering violence with violence is not the way of a real leader. You have managed to damage me in an election year. I will come back in 2 weeks. When I return, I want changes or I will replace you and your accountant." Boss's first idea is to castrate all the prisoners.
Send the cockroaches to the yard.
But it's 120 degrees outside. That's irresponsible.
For this plan, he rounds them all up in the prison yard and barks at them down a megaphone that, back in Germany, his grandfather castrated thousands of pigs because their high testosterone was making them aggressive and violent. He announces, "One of you lucky cocksuckers will get to experience the prototype, the transformation into a sissy eunuch. Castration, then return you into your society as sweet, harmless, submissive pussies." As you might remember from my video on the Human Centipede 1, Dieter Lasser attributed much of his performance to his personal feelings on being the son of a Nazi soldier. I remarked that it seemed as though he was working through some stuff, which gave his performance a very raw, personal impression. I personally believed that it was at this point that Tom Six decided to claim that he had planned the movie to be a metaphor for World War II right from the start. And after seeing The Human Centipede 3, I know Tom Six's statement was likely not true because it was subtle in the first movie, and it is not subtle in this movie. Not only was castration performed in Auschwitz, but Bill Boss's lines are full of direct allusions to Holocaust semantics. Dwight admits he grew his Hitler-esque mustache just so Boss would like him more. When cornered by the inmates in a nightmare sequence, Boss claimed, "I was only following orders," as he cowers and sobs on the floor. Calling the lethal injection the sissy needle, Boss would later say, "Torture, castration, they'll be the final solution." Like, yeah, this is exactly what the first film would have been if the comparisons to World War II had been intentional. Out of insecurity following all the rape threats, Boss handpicks Sister Prisoner 297, congratulating him and having him taken to a special cell. When the two unite, Boss is using his creme brulee toaster to sterilize his little pocket knife. The inmate, not detecting the danger of the situation, announces that he likes his men bold and invites Boss to suck his dick. Ironically, balls of steel. Boss responds by castrating him with the pocket knife without anesthesia. Amidst the most intense, sweatiest zoom-in shots in the movie, we see his little ball bag. Yes, we see Boss dig into it with a knife and pull out his actual testicles, like the little white nubbins. Yes, he does have them sent to the prison kitchen to be prepared for his lunch. Bill Boss shoves this guy against the wall and rips his prison jumpsuit open at the bum in a sick perversion of violent dominance and sexual assault. He wipes the inmate's blood all over his face, soaking in it. Off screen we can see the guards standing completely still, literally actors who have been given no direction and presumably did not expect to be included in the shot. Thankfully, this scene brings with it the best character in the movie, and in my opinion, the best performance of this film by a mile. Dr. Jones, played by Clayton Rona, is head and shoulders the best part of this film. I hope he knows how brilliant he was. Not only was he the most natural actor in the cast by a country mile, but he was just intrinsically entertaining and he had perfect comedic timing.
But we've given him some morphine to manage the pain.
I personally castrated him.
Yes, we all are aware.
Dr. Jones is here because this is the only hospital that will hire him without his medical license. A nice touch that I felt contributed to the authenticity of his character, made it natural that he would fit in well with Boss's big plan, and make it slightly more understandable when he's too scared to defy him, lest he lose his job in the only place that will hire him.
I want you to watch these.
Oh, I've seen those. They're really good.
Unfortunately, the castration doesn't work. Going to gloat over the prisoner in the medical bay, Boss is surprised to hear that the inmate is even angrier, even more hell-bent on revenge. Inmate 297 promises Boss that he doesn't need a penis to do what he's going to do to him or his Nazi parents, who he promises to dig up and defile in turn. Boss is so upset by this that he goes on a whiskey binge, eventually winding up back in his office with a tired, withering Dwight, who is fed up of not being heard. Unwittingly sealing his own fate at this moment, Dwight forces Boss to listen to his idea for the Human Centipede. Although Boss fires him, he soon passes out and wakes up just in time to receive Dwight and special guest Tom Six the next morning. Yes, Tom Six is in this movie. At first, I was rolling my eyes so hard I think I pulled a muscle. He rocks up in this proud Mercedes with his aviators on, a cool white hat, and a pretty clean but super crumpled and ill-fitting suit. Naturally, Secretary Daisy is like, "Mr. Tom Six," and she asks him to sign an autograph for her before he goes into the office, floundering all over him like a huge fan, and he goes, "Sure, babe." Aviators still on indoors. With these seeds planted, I fully assumed it would be a self-fellatio fest for Mr. Six. Thankfully, this seemed to be a red herring intended to set himself up as a cool director, only to crumble at the last second. Although Six is really on board with the idea, and even asks to see the operations in person, he ends up throwing up and bowing out when reality hits him. I found this quite funny, and felt as though he was able to make jokes at his own expense through his script, which went down well with me at least. I laughed during his first meeting with Bill Boss, who split the dried clit he had been chewing at him. It bounces dimly off Six's beige jacket, and Six just looks confused. Although we don't get nearly enough Human Centipede action in this movie, likely because coordinating so many extras was probably a massive logistical pain in the arse when we remember the 3 Human Centipede members from the first movie needed daily massages to cope with the strain of shuffling around all day, we do get lots and lots of logistics, and I love learning about the logistics. The logistics begin in Boss's office in a conversation with Dwight, Tom Six, and Dr. Jones, who also happens to be a huge fan of Tom Six's work. Everyone around the table keeps using the term 100% medically accurate, which really bugged me, actually. I know it was part of the marketing campaign for the first movie and it's a reference, but it's so wedged into the script and I can't figure out for the life of me what they were trying to prove by having the characters repeat it over and over again. Tom Six hands over the detailed operation report he received when consulting a surgeon for the first movie, which is just a printout of the drawings from the first movie. Sure, whatever, it's just a prop. And then Dr. Jones goes through this fairly thorough explanation of what exactly you would need to actually have this work. He explains things like anti-rejection medications, daily injections of essential vitamins and minerals to account for what you'd be lacking on an excretia-only diet, how the feces wouldn't be contaminated since it would technically never be outside the body, etc, etc. I know these explanations have been around since the first movie, mainly discussed by the production team in various interviews, but it was actually so interesting to hear it explained here. And they build on it too. Dwight points out the obvious problems. Pulling teeth and cutting knee ligaments would be a level of mutilation incompatible with effective release back into society. So instead they use equipment to basically fasten the lips by sewing the lips to the anus, and they inject into the knee ligaments to induce temporary paralysis. He creates his own diagram, demonstrating a system of leather straps to be used to tie the prisoners together. All that would remain would be light scarring on the mouth and anus. I love details like this in movies, so you can bet I was engrossed. Boss, as sadistic as ever, and and fully against Dwight's recommendations, shows the inmates the first two movies as mental training in a pretty wank scene, to be honest. Despite the movie working very hard to depict the inmates of this prison as unstable, uncontrollable rape monsters, Tom Six uses this scene as an opportunity to mock criticisms previously levied against the series. Inmate 333, played by Akihiro Kitamura, who led the PED in the first movie, shouts, "This trash occupies a world where the stars do not shine," mocking reviewer Roger Ebert, who had died in real life, about a year before this movie came out. Considering the circumstances, it felt poor taste to mock him like this so soon afterwards. Inmate 488, played by Bill Hutchins, screams, "These films risk causing harm. They should be banned." And the prisoners riot. I appreciate that directors and writers will sometimes inject critiques against their work into their scripts, but I have yet to see a scene where it comes off well, especially when that initial critique was valid. I'm reminded of that scene from the Witcher series where a sneaking attempt is foiled by one character getting in-universe feedback on his ballads. I don't think that scene was too bad, but even so, it gave me a little bit of second-hand embarrassment, especially since the critiques the writers mocked in that scene were extremely relevant. I just think these scenes are very hard to pull off well because they're often either mocking perfectly valid criticism or having the criticism mocked through characters that need to be very out of character to do so. This movie has spent so much time setting these individuals up as crazed demons. Why would they want a movie banned? Why would they take moral issue with a film that features rape, since rape is like their favourite thing ever? When the warden proudly tells the inmates that he will be putting all of them in a centipede, they riot, which is reasonable. Thankfully, ham-fisted critic mockery zoomed straight back to more logistics discussion, and I went from grimacing with second-hand cringe to sitting forward in my seat again, hungry for details. In an interview with The Guardian, Tom Six said, "I don't do morals. Audiences are now like heroin addicts. They want more and more thrills, so people want more and more things to get off on, and I give them things they haven't seen before." And I think he is correct here, but in the wrong way. I'll talk more about this interview later, but bluntly speaking, Tom Six uses this as an excuse to inject tons of abuse and what he calls political incorrectness into every scene in the movie. Basically, it's just crammed full of tons of offensive stuff, and I feel like he missed the mark. I'm here because you've introduced me to the concept of a human centipede, slowly warmed me up to how it will work, and then told me you're making a movie featuring a 500-man human centipede. I'm here because I want extremity. I want to see this thought experiment played out to its most miserable extent. I want to be repulsed, to see the gore and the surgery and the outcome and the blood and poo and suffering, not to watch Dieter Larsa drop the N-bomb more than my uncle after a double whiskey. I do want more and more thrills, and these surgery scenes and logistics discussions were nailing that morbid curiosity. When I figured out he meant rape scenes, I was like, I can get that from most extreme horror. That's not the role I'm asking you to fill. Boss is already teasing that he has special plans for life sentence prisoners. He and Dr. Jones wander through the medical bay and have to figure out how to deal with a few problems that present themselves. There's a man with Crohn's disease who has constant diarrhea. This revelation is accompanied by a stock fart sound effect and a scene with this weird out of focus zoom. How odd. Question here is, who do we put behind him? And the answer is Boss's least favourite inmate, a man he refers to as a white Anglo-Saxon prostitute, who overhears this discussion, begs for his life, and then I guess the anaesthesia kicks in because he falls asleep.
Just asleep though. Look how peaceful he is.
There is a man with a stoma whose rectum is sewn up, and a man in a wheelchair. Neither of them can participate, so Bill Boss just shoots them both.
What the fuck?
There's some mentally unwell man who actually really enjoys eating his own shit and expresses excitement at being in the human centipede. Tom Six, whose stomach is already visibly turning, turns away as Bill Boss shoots the inmate. The suffering is the point. We see the surgery taking place. We see the surgical thread enter the circumference of a man's anus.
Christ almighty. I actually saw another man's anus just now.
The warden is shaking with excitement and asks Tom Six if he has a hard-on. Six just looks unwell. When Six sees the plans Bill Boss announces as an improvement, copyright Bill Boss, he loses his lunch all over the mirror. Whatever this improvement entails, we see that it involves the sawing off of limbs, which land in cold metal buckets by the surgical table with a large bang. Dwight is intrigued, but Bill Boss leads him away.
I hope they got along during the film. I hope they were friends.
And finally, the moment of truth. The centipede is ready to go, just in time for the governor to arrive.
PED looks perfect. The last few prisoners have just been attached, and although the wounds are still fresh, you get the idea.
Finally, the question raised by this movie is answered, and we get to see the output of such a vile thought experiment. The human prison centipede. We witness it for the first time alongside Governor Hughes, whose alarm bells begin ringing the moment Boss uses the word attached to describe his prisoners. Outside, in the all-American summer heat, Hughes, and us, the audience, bear witness to the 500-person human centipede for the very first time. time. Some weird random OST drones for one single loop in the background, and then we're back to silence. The music in this movie is so ill-fitting. It often feels like you've left an advert running on another tab, some autoplay YouTube video or something. Every time music plays, it's so intrusive the way it's slapped into a scene, left to loop once, and then abandoned. There's one bloke convulsing as someone shits into his mouth, sloppy sound effects abound, stock fart noises rip through my speakers. Most prisoners wait obediently on their hands and knees. Very little happens here beyond Dwight's explanation of how this will cut costs. The governor notices Daisy. Boss's assistant has also been sewn into the Human Centipede. I have a lot to say about Daisy, and I'm going to get onto her in just one moment. If you're thinking I've forgotten or I've left her out, fear not, she has a whole part of this video. After leaving her to her fate, Boss and Butler lead Hughes to the human caterpillar, the death row inmates whose arms and legs have been sewn off. The shot lingers on them for about 5 seconds, and then we move on forever. So many of these scenes are so fleeting, there's no detail. My morbid curiosity was absolutely blue-balled in lieu of having to watch tons of screaming Bill Boss scenes instead, and my disappointment was indescribable. We meet an inmate who has been sewn into the centipede only to be immediately released. The timeline is very iffy. This shell of a man who sits quietly on his bed. He shakes the warden's hand and leaves. Although we don't know what he's saying, we get the impression that he is grateful. That's it, really. All that build up for this. A few still shots of a few people in a centipede, and the only one we might care about by this point is Daisy. There's very little here to care about, and very little explored beyond here is what a longer human centipede would look like. The governor fakes out with an initial, "This is a violation of human rights and federal ethics. I am fucked. You insane freaks should get the death penalty for this," but he's soon back with the tried and true, "This is exactly what America needs. This might even get me elected president. You've convinced me. It's genius. Don't change a goddamn thing. My pals in DC won't believe this." Killing Dwight so he can claim the idea as his own, the final shot of the movie has the warden screaming his lungs out into a megaphone, naked, in the prison tower over his human centipede. The culmination of the thought experiment presented, should we deter people from crime by making prison a living hell, and how much of a prisoner's bodily consent are we entitled to? As you can see, the conclusion of this movie is hardly, yes, this is a good idea. We are entitled to torture people for the rest of their sentence, and worse if their sentence spans the rest of their lives, but honestly, it doesn't go either way, and it doesn't really explore this to the fullest extent. On the most basic level, what about people who are wrongfully convicted? What opportunity do people convicted of lesser crimes have to get out on good behaviour if they cannot demonstrate real change? The people in this prison entered its gates with no knowledge that it would be an eventuality. It's a bit unfair to put them in a centipede. Why not put new people in a centipede, not existing prisoners? And that's only if we examine this under the expectation that it will happen. There was very little on-screen exploration of whether it should happen at all. No protesters, no family members, hell, no visitors. The only time we see an inmate use their monthly family call, it's an inmate calling Bill Boss to threaten to rape him, implying that he has no one better to call. No either go in the human centipede for 1 year or serve a life sentence debate. No moral choice, no agency or decision making that would have fleshed out this concept and made it really juicy. Ultimately, I think this was the most solid foundation of any of the series installments, but unfortunately it failed to find much worthwhile exploration. Now, I really want to talk about Daisy. In an interview with Forbes, David Howard Thornton, the actor who plays Art in the Terrifier series, discussed the implementation of rape in extreme cinema. It's definitely something we've chatted about in the past, and I think the one line that Art will never cross is rape. That is just a very taboo subject for him, Howard told The Hollywood Reporter. I don't even view him as being a sexual creature in that way. That's just something that is beneath him, and I don't like that idea or anything like that. It disturbs me and disgusts me, and I just think that something like that has no place in film. The Terrifier movies are unique because they're fairly mainstream for extreme horror, which doesn't typically see theatrical release on the same kind of scale. So on some level, I think the depiction of rape may also factor into subconscious decisions made to keep Terrifier at that level of accessibility. Not that it's some secret actual profiteering greedy reason, the guys who make Terrifier seem really genuine people, just more it will factor in somewhere down the line, and I imagine extreme horror movies that never anticipate a theatrical release will never have to factor that in. I don't oppose rape in extreme horror cinema. For a lot of people, rape is extremely horrifying, so it fits this genre if nothing else. Extreme horror is a vicarious medium for safely watching the worst possible things happen to a cast of characters in the knowledge that they are not real people and are merely playing a role. It's enormously case by case, obviously. I don't greenlight every instance because it's a depiction of nuance and power imbalance and context. And when I say that, I don't mean in-universe does the context mean they deserve it? Like, I would never suggest that, and I don't mean it. Rather, I'm discussing the depiction in the literal sense of the cinema. A tweak in context can take a scene from deeply impactful, miserable depiction of the realities of humanity in particular circumstances to carousel of mean-spirited point and laugh, strip down the stupid slut and treat her how we want on screen because it's edgy and I'm also masturbating to it as I write it. And one, honestly, I think that's why rape wouldn't work in Terrifier, because art approaches gore with an attitude more aligned with the latter, but also two, one is raw, miserable, in some places cathartic, and a deeply personally affecting experience even when watched in company, and two is just cruelty in the most meta sense. With that established, let's talk about the character Daisy, played by Brie Olson. Brie Olson was a porn actress between the years 2006 and 2011, starring, according to a brief glance on her Wikipedia, in around 170 adult films in that period. Olson is a really sweet woman, now 38 years old, who did her time in porn, and like many of us after 5 years in a job, decided that she wanted to move on and try something else. Only in an interview with Real Women, Real Stories, she shared exactly how it felt to be an ex-porn star in a world that hates sex work.
People treat me as if I am a pedophile. They don't treat me like an ex-sex worker. They treat me like I would somehow be damaging to children.
A simple question, like, how would you like to be treated?
Oh my gosh, I've never thought about that. I wish that people would treat me how they would treat a married registered nurse with 2.5 kids in Indiana. That's how I wish people would treat me.
I feel awful for her. There aren't many careers you're forbidden by society to escape, something you'll be known as forever, and even fewer where those lifelong connotations are so negative that you're treated with the same contempt as the neighborhood sex offender. She ended up having to go back to porn because no one would hire her, and those who did hire her, as I am about to thoroughly demonstrate to you, knew the power they had over her and they abused her. Daisy exists in this movie to be the victim of frequent, brutal sexual assault and exploitation. She is fingered without her consent within the first few minutes of the movie, grabbed literally by the pussy as she stands by William Boss's desk and he barks some bullshit at her. As the movie goes on, she is forced to give him oral sex and forced to swallow it in the only scene in cinema in recent memory that makes me retch really hard when I remember it.
That's a 10 solid.
She is beaten half to death by rioting prisoners, raped while unconscious, tricked into eating a real human clitoris, extorted into sexual acts because the warden did her father a favour, and then sewed into the human prison centipede and left to suffer, presumably forever, as the only person on her side is killed before he can even think to do anything about it. But I think what really turned me against this depiction of her was her casting and wardrobe decisions. When Boss grabs her by the pussy, saying, "Don't bother me tits, having the privilege to suck me dry doesn't give the woman a right to an opinion," telling her to shut her pussy mouth and go answer my fucking mail, Daisy tearfully rushes out of the room. The scene is undercut somewhat by her being in a leopard print miniskirt, so short that you can see the lines under her arse cheeks, which the camera leers at on several occasions, including one full screen shot that's so detailed that you can see the sweat on her inner thighs. When Dwight sees Boss abusing the prisoners, he steps in and stops him. When he sees Boss breaking the arm of a prisoner who stabbed a guard, Dwight yells at him to quit it, blusteringly adding, "Think of the medical costs." Like, you get the impression he's morally opposed to it, but the only thing that will get through to Boss is the discussion of medical costs. Dwight is so uncomfortable with the way Boss treats prisoners, yet when Daisy is sexually abused and humiliated in front of him, the scene suddenly ends and a new conversation begins. The situation is totally shaken off the moment she leaves the room, like it happened in perfect isolation from anything else. It's genuinely cruel the way this character, and her actress by extension, is treated. I think there's something very calculated about hiring an ex-porn star for a role like this, then dressing her in the kind of thing you'd see in a porn parody of American Psycho, and then having her bending over with her ass to the camera in every scene she's in. There's something so demeaning and mean-spirited, there's something we are supposed to be finding titillating about this. The POV shots of her sucking dick and swallowing cum, the panty shots, the ass zoom-ins, it's all intended to be erotic for the viewer. While the rest of the film falls into black comedy territory in the best case reading, all of Daisy's scenes involve lurid on-screen and in-universe exploitation. Whenever we see her by her desk, she is visibly crying and shaking. When Boss rants and raves, Daisy Daisy shrinks down, tries to make herself small, and is too scared to make eye contact or speak, like a beaten animal. In one instance, the prisoners begin a riot that gets out of hand, and they're able to escape into the administration sections of the prison. This scene is framed by genuine attempts at comedy, such as the way Bill Boss runs to escape the prisoners. Daisy tries to rush into the office with him and Dwight, but he grabs her by the head and shoves her back outside on her own. At this point, she is viciously beaten bloody by one prisoner, while another prisoner masturbates over her, grimacing and sweaty with effort. Inside the office, the tone is still distinctly dark comedy. The warden leaps out of the window in terror, and Dwight pops a dried clit and readies a gun, this tiny accountant taking his last stand. When guards arrive in the nick of time, Dwight spits out the clit and shakes himself off. For the men, the tone is light-hearted and slapstick. Daisy suffers one of the most terrifying experiences a person can suffer, and there are two possible readings of this, neither of them positive. Firstly, you can read into it that Daisy's fate is supposed to be a joke. If Boss and Butler's routine is supposed to be comedy, and the strained face of inmate 333 is supposed to make you laugh, then maybe the zoom in on Daisy's beaten and bloody face is also supposed to be funny. Or second, it's not a joke. It's just a woman getting beaten bloody rather than being allowed in the office with the men, and no one really cares or says anything about it, and the scene just moves on once again once we've watched it happen. Daisy ends up in the prison hospital with the rest of the inmates, comatose after her beating. Dwight, slimy and very hateable, remarks, "She's the only beautiful and sweet thing about this place. She should be treated in a regular hospital." "No," replies Boss. "I want my cocksucker close. Beaten up women make me so horny." And then he rapes her while she's unconscious, stating, "I'll make you squirt even in a coma." And the scene ends, and no one really cares. Later, we find she has been sewn into the Human Centipede, which the warden laughingly explains to the visiting governor is a gender test, and that's where her story ends. I appreciate that Brie Olson took this role by choice, and maybe could have turned it down, but I think it's also important to appreciate that the script wasn't ready until only a few weeks before shooting, hence why Dieter Larsa tried to back out at the last minute. Dieter Larsa was also sued for trying to leave production, and yes, that's likely because he was arguably irreplaceable, but like I said, ended up being a terrible choice for this film. It's also important to appreciate that Brie was trying to move into more conventional acting roles and was being discriminated against left and right. In her own words, she said that people treat you like a paedophile after you do porn. Six's depictions of women in the other Human Centipede movies were fairly shallow, but ultimately nothing to complain about. So I think it was reasonable for Brie to expect to be treated with some respect in the script. Unfortunately, the opposite happened. Hopefully, she at least had a nice time on set, even if her ultimate depiction was pure humiliation. And I'm just gonna say it, I feel like Six got an ex-porn star involved with this movie because he needed someone that people wouldn't mind seeing repeatedly raped and abused as a punchline to a joke. He needed someone he assumed people wouldn't feel sorry for. He needed someone that people would argue does porn anyway, so what is she complaining about? Someone for whom people see their consent with far less regard, because if you sell your body, then you have no right to it anymore. Tom Six's attitudes towards women come off pretty explicitly through the way he talks in interviews. In an interview with BBC Entertainment, Six described the casting process for the girls in the first movie. "We did the auditions in New York for the American girls, and we got a lot of beautiful actresses to the audition. I showed the drawings to the actresses, and so many became very angry with me. They thought I was a European lunatic, so they left. The smart ones stayed. A lot of actresses only want to be pretty in films, and this is something different." Six simultaneously talks with a lot of derision towards actresses who only want to be pretty, whilst his only descriptor for his potential stars was beautiful. Brie Olson was certainly selected to be abused eye candy. Six never said anything about talent or enthusiasm, just looks, especially emphasizing that only the smart ones stayed, when, as objectively speaking as I can muster, I would consider starring in the Human Centipede to be career suicide. For better or worse, extreme horror, especially extreme horror where you're nude and eating shit, has a similar effect on one's career as doing porn, where you'll forever be known as that woman that did a movie where she ate shit because she needed a breakout role. To select women for their beauty and then make them essentially unhireable in the mainstream, and then call them smart for not walking away from such an opportunity, is emblematic of the exact attitude that puts an ex-porn star in a role purely to be raped repeatedly. Daisy is forced to perform oral sex on Bill Boss in front of Dwight in a scene played for laughs, as Bill makes crazy sounds and screams when he comes, red-faced and strained and sweaty, cigar hanging from his lips. He refers to her as his pet. When he comes in her mouth, literally fills her mouth to the brim, it's so disgusting. He holds her head still and reminds her that he didn't get her asshole father out of prison for nothing, telling her to swallow it bitch. When she asks for candy for the taste, she doesn't realise the candy in question is actually the jar full of dried clitorises. Boss allows her one and then stops Butler from intervening, essentially tricking Daisy into cannibalism. In the next scene, we see Daisy can barely bring herself to touch the strawberries she bought in her packed lunch. On the phone to her father, she promises that there's nothing wrong and that she's just been working a lot of hours. It's a tragic, tragic scene. In an interview with The Guardian, Six claimed, "Politically, it is very incorrect," says Six. "This time I wanted to create the ultimate asshole, an impotent racist who hates women. Like, yeah, we know you consider yourself politically incorrect when you had the warden recite, 'Thank God for Africa, thank God for female circumcision,' in a quote so contrived it was clearly done to incite upset. But I think the problem with this portrayal is that this ultimate asshole isn't used as a vessel to mock impotent racists who hate women. He's not used as a piñata we can batter at and break down. Rather, he is used as a vessel for the audience to get to enjoy firsthand the humiliation, belittling, and abuse of female victims. This politically incorrect satire just continues to align itself with the status quo. No, we're not supposed to agree with Bill Boss. No, we're not supposed to support him. Yes, we are supposed to be bewildered when the film concludes and he's the only one who walked away with reward, happier than he's ever been. But we are supposed to watch a POV shot of a beaten and abused secretary with her head between our legs, begging not to have to swallow our cum, and look at her smoky eyeshadow and her tousled blonde hair, and we are supposed to feel this dominant power. And before you say, but Bill Boss gets raped in the movie too, I'd remind you that A, it occurs in a dream sequence, so it has zero consequence for the character and is dropped immediately, and B, weirdly, I never thought I'd say this in my entire life, so bear with me, the rape is performed by cutting a hole in Bill's abdomen with a knife and having sex with the hole. He is surrounded by the prisoners in the cafeteria, pinned down, and raped in his torso as they stand around him, screaming and dancing like cultists around the ritual circle. This is gonna be really, really weird for me to admit, but I actually had a nightmare like this once, and I'm not lying, I swear on Seffi's life, it was Disco Stew from The Simpsons, literally in the torso. That is crazy that this movie unlocked such a wild memory, and emphasis on unlocked, because I had forgotten about it. It was really weird and uncomfortable, but it was a nightmare and it had no lasting impact that, say, actual real-life assault would have on a person. In the movie, Boss falls to his knees and begs and tells them he was only following orders, very slick, very subtle. As he is raped, he looks up and sees Dwight giving oral relief to a prisoner. The visuals of this scene are extreme and painful, but it's a dream. This means that this event does not occur, has no lasting impact on the warden, and even with the nature of this scene being temporary and completely forgotten the moment it concludes, they still couldn't bring themselves to include actual sexual assault against Boss the way they repeatedly do for Daisy. It's just more of a mutilation? Is it still rape if you cut a hole into them to have sex? I suppose it is. Maybe the impact of the scene is muddied by its ridiculous and fleeting nature as a nightmare sequence. Either way, Boss finishes the movie entirely untouched and unharmed. His obsession over sexual assault comes to no definitive conclusion. Daisy's arc sees her as a victim repeatedly. Her arc is her abuse, and she finishes the story as an innocent woman imprisoned in a fate worse than death. Taking any conventional actress, putting her in a porn parody secretary outfit, and having her screen time dedicated to her own rape and abuse would also be tragic, but the intention with Brie Olson was to have her there as the butt of the joke, and I can't respect it. That interview with Real Women, Real Stories made me cry, and it was posted less than a year after the release of the Human Centipede 3, so we can be safe to assume that much of the discrimination she describes while attempting to enter a new genre of acting was discrimination she dealt with during her time on this film. Long story short, but Brie, I am so sorry this happened to you. The prison system is one seldom explored so bluntly in movies, and I'd love to say this was a gritty satire, but Six does a bit too much fence-sitting for it to be valid. In an interview with The Guardian, he claimed, yes, absolutely, racism, violence, those are problems, says Six, slightly vaguely. You have the Republicans who want prison to be harder with the death penalty and stuff, so my film is like one big satire of the prison system, but also you can't take it seriously. I love the way the journalist emphasizes how vaguely Six glosses over the concept of racism and violence being problems. The article takes this mild side-eye attitude towards him. Like, I detect just a smidgen of contempt from writer Hannah Ellis Pearson, and I see you, girly, and I want you to know I had a huge grin on my face from that detail alone. Likely because this was the same interview where Tom Six said, I don't do morals, he said, in a thick Dutch accent. Audiences, he believes, are now like heroin addicts. They want more and more thrills. So people want things to get off on, and I give them the things they haven't seen before. Six is 41, but still a gleeful adolescent at heart. I am a total prankster. As a quick translation for my American audience, audience, I know there's a few of you, that Six is 41 but still a gleeful adolescent at heart is a polite British way of saying this man has not grown up, and he should. And it's true. Although I have given Tom Six props across these 3 videos for things I think he did really well, these quotes from him hammer home to me just how much he acts like the kind of white teenage boys who play devil's advocate because they get to play around with social and political issues that will never ever affect them personally. There's a point in life where even the grubbiest cousin gets off 4chan, discovers 3-in-1 shampoo, and hands his CV in for a mortgage advisor position at the local Lloyds, and I think Tom Six actually does a great job of making himself look so much worse in interviews because all of his ridiculous quotes about how much of a trickster and prankster he is, and how he is above morality, actually come off really bad. And the thing is, his cameo in the movie shows that he is capable of being a joke. He pokes fun at himself when he has his self-inserted cameo lose his lunch all over his window after seeing the real-life application of the Human Centipede in real time. In these glimmers of authenticity, we do see someone who can take it on the chin and really puts entertainment ahead of looking cool and grandiose. What a lot of people fail to understand is that morality does not make or break a movie. It often contributes to it. Doing whatever you want because you can is all well and good, but it creates an in-movie universe whereby nothing has a consequence, so it ends up being a slideshow of performative gore and violence. The first Human Centipede movie is tragic because we know the Doctor is doing evil, and the good guys, the police, almost save the day and fail. The premise of Hostel works because it demonstrates how the dynamics of power and wealth we are born into mean that rich people do not have to answer to morality or law. They can do what they want, and poor people are merely animals to them. The premise of Climax worked, even if the movie lacked in other areas, because it was about one person ignoring morality to commit evil to the people around them, evading justice the entire time. One person doing something in a contrived circumstance is all well and good, but it's ironically deeply, deeply shallow. This film lacks any texture. It's like a run-on sentence that goes on and on and on, and it's being screamed in your ears at full volume, and you get it, but really you wanted to know what happens when you apply the concept of the Human Centipede to the American penal system, and some old man is just yelling dried clitorises on repeat like a skipping record, and the words are blurring together, and because they're blurring together, nothing is really making an impression on you because things happen, but there's not a tangible on-screen response from anyone, so it just happens and the scene changes and another thing happens and so on and so forth. Yeah, this one was the worst, easily. I think the worst part of the Human Centipede is how little we see of it. The extreme horror and gore was the best part of 2, for me, even in parts stretched to the point of snapping for the sake to wedge in yet another notch to the extreme gore bedpost. The Human Centipede does not take actual form until the last 10-15 minutes of this almost 2-hour film, at which point we see a few scenes of it standing around and hear a few squelchy noises as members of the Pede go boom boom in each other, but by and large my morbid curiosity was not satiated. When I'm watching extreme horror, I know I'm seeing an extremity. This is not going to be explored anywhere else in any other movie, so you have to take what you have and show it to me in every different disgusting angle. This is, to me, science fiction in a very muted, extended reality sense. I want to see it fully explored. I love the time they took to depict the operation, but you have to understand, you are my only source of Human Centipede related shenanigans, and you need to really capitalize on it. No one else is going to be doing this. The cherry on top was the actual anus on screen, presumably some grim prosthetic that ended up lost by the time production wrapped up, stolen away to some intern's house. Instead, so much of the movie is dedicated towards watching William Boss scream his lungs out over every little thing, rape his secretary, and shoot prisoners. And if those aspects of the film were good and well-paced and interesting, and Bill Boss wasn't portrayed so horribly that my ears curled inwards like little Brussels sprouts whenever he started speaking, I think it would be fine. This movie brings up a lot of current real-world social issues and discusses a solution. No, it doesn't advocate that solution, but it takes the very thought experiment Tom Six began this ridiculous venture with 10 years prior and plays it out to a full real-world application. All in all, the Human Centipede series advertises extremity in all ways and guarantees politically incorrect fun. By and large, I found it underwhelming on both counts. Most of the extremity is confined to the latter third of the second movie, a movie that I felt sucked too hard to deserve the right to include things like dead baby scenes and barbed wire rape scenes. Most of the political incorrectness is just Dieter Larsa screaming racial slurs from the top of a prison tower off the back of a script he had to be sued into performing, written by a man to whom racial slurs and female abuse will only ever be a joke. I think this series has a lot of potential. As far as thought experiments go, the Human Centipede has one of the best at its core. Playing it out to its ultimate potential real-world applications could be a fairly haunting exercise and one well worth putting to film. Nailing all the tenets of human repulsion, mutilation, extreme and inescapable medical abuse, and poo, the Human Centipede took a shoe-in premise and did okay with it. It employed some good actors, it had some funny moments, and it had some interesting stories. Would I recommend these movies? I think they're unique enough to recommend. recommend. This isn't the kind of tale I consider to be overdone. The Human Centipede doesn't rehash many things seen elsewhere, and it isn't rehashed in turn. If you're interested in seeing a wide variety of things in your lifetime, I would definitely give them a go. That said, if you've only seen one, then you've seen them all. So if you're wondering whether to bother with the trilogy, I would say only if you're enjoying it. You're not going to find any diamonds by digging any further. Ultimately, I'm glad I got to explore these films with you all. Thanks for being here for these last 3 months of fun movie analyses. Thanks to Tom Six for giving it a go. Thanks to the casts of these movies for trying something experimental. And most importantly, thank you for watching. See you in the next one.